Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call to order the June 6, 2022 Joint Board of Supervisors and School Board Committee meeting. This room has a hearing loop. If you need hearing assistance with your hearing aids to telecoil mode, if you need a headset, we have those available as well. Please see the clerk to request one. Could we all stand and say the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Hemstreet, I have a question for you. I understand that there have been some determinations regarding which committee members can vote during a consideration for remote participation. Can you please explain which committee members are allowed to participate in this vote and why it may be different from the April and February meetings?
Yes, Chair Glass. I will attempt to provide an explanation. Mr. Rogers is here also if I fumble this at all. My understanding is that each entity, whether it's the Board of Supervisors or the school board, determines whether or not their member can participate in a joint committee meeting remotely in accordance with their board's rules. And so in this case, the person requesting to attend remotely is a school board member. And so that would be determined by the school board members who are present in the meeting this evening in accordance with the school board's rules for remote participation, which differ from the Board of Supervisors rules. At the last joint meeting, the issue came about relatively quickly. In fact, I was informed of the change or the difference about 3 minutes before the meeting started. We just made a quick determination, follow the school board rules since we were at the school administration building, we follow the school board rules for remote participation for their members. How we handled that was with the full committee voting. Since that meeting, we have had the opportunity to go back, talk with both the county attorney as well as the school division attorney to sort out how this should be handled under each of our respective board rules and each of our respective processes. And so the conclusion that we came to today with support from the school board attorney as well as the county attorney is that each board handles it for their members in accordance with their individual board rules.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'll ask Co-Chair Morse to make the required motion for Member Corbo to participate remotely per the school board's rules of order.
Thank you, Co-Chair Glass. Ms. Corbo, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Ms. Corbo, I understand you would like to remotely participate in today's proceedings. Can you state for the record where you are located, whether you are alone, and whether this will be a medical or a personal exemption?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On November 2021, the school board requested that I go through the LCPS Human Resources Department to evaluate my disability and need for a reasonable accommodation under ADA disability law. LCPS HRTD's recommendation based on my disability is remote meeting participation and attendance. Therefore, I'm requesting to attend the meeting virtually for health and medical reasons.
Okay, and can you state your location and whether you are alone?
Yes, I am at home and I am alone.
Okay, so for school board members, Ms. Corbo is home alone and requests a medical exemption. I will make the motion. I move to admit Ms. Corbo to the meeting. Is there a second? That motion will fail for lack of a second. Thank you, Ms. Glass.
Thank you. Okay, let's head to public input. There are no advanced sign-up speakers for our public input portion of the meeting. Is there anyone in the room that would like to address the committee? Seeing there are none, we will move on to the co-chair's report on the Board of Supervisors and the school board activities. Co-chair Morse, would you like to go first, since you are?
I'd be delighted. Thank you, Co-Chair Glass. I don't have a lot of comments today, but I do want to reflect on LCPS successes over the last few months as we look to end the year on a high note. We started with our students, including a high school student who was selected as a presidential scholar and an Odyssey of the Mind team that won first place in the World Finals. We have been once again selected as a best community for music education for the 15th straight year. All 15 high schools have achieved best high school status within the U.S. News and World Reports. Briar Woods was given the Cognia Award of Distinction, one of only 78 schools in the world that were identified as such. Our Washington Post Teacher of the Year was Loudon teacher, Mr. Mark Wood from Rock Ridge. That marks the first time that an LCPS teacher was selected as the Washington Post representative, so well done. Also, just this past week, we held a ceremony for graduating 148 teacher cadets, and we hope all 148 will return to Loudon in 3 to 5 years and participate as professional educators for us. We had 12 National Merit Scholars. We received top honors at DECA International Career Development Conference in Atlanta. Riverbend High School teacher Crystal Wallen was named the 2022 Virginia Middle School Association's Teacher of the Year. And there are just so many more that I could go through our entire hour. But for the fact that we need to move on with our meeting, I will end it there. But I will state that we look forward to the end of the year. Congratulate all of our graduates, promotees, and awardees. High school graduations, 5th grade promotions, and the middle school awards are come in very heavy this time of the year. So congratulations to all the celebrants, to the families, and also to the teachers that got our students where they are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Morse. This is a very exciting time at the end of the year for our graduates. So thank you for talking about that. A lot has happened with the Board of Supervisors since this committee has last met 2 months ago. Immediately following the meeting in April, the Board of Supervisors approved the budget for fiscal year 2023, which included an LCPS transfer increase of $53.7 million. At the same meeting, we also chose our item to include in the Douglas High School Commemorative Committee's time capsule that will be placed at the site after the renovation is complete. The board chose to include a pin, a photo, and a letter to be reopened in approximately 50 years. Which I doubt if I will be here. In May, the board approved a work plan for a comprehensive plan amendment for the Red Hill community off Evergreen Mill Road. The comprehensive plan amendment would move the Red Hill community from the county's rural policy area to the transition policy area. I bring this up to the school board members because located in this area is a site owned by LCPS that is slated to be both a middle school and high school site. The school system is listed as a stakeholder in planning and zoning's work plan. Tomorrow night, the board is scheduled to approve the new plan for local redistrict maps that are used for members of the school board and the Board of Supervisors. The map will come into effect beginning at the 2023 election for the term beginning in 2024 and will be used through 2031 when they are redrawn after the 2030 census. The maps we arrived were based on large part on keeping HOAs and communities of interest together, and we responded to several community requests that were received through the redistricting process. I can speak for myself when I say I think we arrived on a map that will serve Loudoun County well for the next 2 board terms. I also want to quickly mention that the board has approved and received several residential rezoning requests throughout the county, but specifically along the Route 7 corridor, I encourage both supervisors and school board members to make sure you're communicating with each other regarding student generation capacity and attendance zones in your respective districts with regard to how they relate to rezonings and where our boards overlap. That's my report, Co-Chair Morse. All right, so we will move on to our to item 1, which is the agricultural education and gardening programs at LCPS. There's no presentation, so please reference the written report. So see if we have any questions or comments. Supervisor Briskman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I appreciate staff going through and surveying all the schools and figuring out about gardens at those locations. I found that information very interesting and helpful, and I will have a motion when the time is right. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Umstattd?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. A question for probably Mr. Lewis. I was delighted to see how many of the schools actually have small plots that they can use for this purpose. Some do not, however. Does the school system have plans to incorporate in those schools garden areas, agricultural areas?
Thank you, Supervisor Umstattd. So the school system does not have a county-wide process by which those gardens are established. Those are done on a school-by-school basis, sometimes through the science program, sometimes just interest of a particular teacher. So we do not have any guidance directly for that, and it's done, as I mentioned, by school. So at this point, there's no system-wide process to make any, to expand that.
So follow up on that. Is each principal the most likely individual to determine whether or not a school will have a plot like that?
I think that's probably a fair assumption. The principal would certainly be involved. It may be something that is initiated by a particular department or a particular staff member, but certainly, and especially if there's any work orders, those types of things from my department with support services. So, for example, if someone was going to establish a garden and start tilling up the ground, we would come in and check the area to make sure there's nothing that shouldn't be dug up while they do that. And so those processes, we do have a process in place to evaluate a particular project, and we do require the principal to be consulted and approve that before it's started, if that gets to your question.
Yes, it does. Do you, if let's say every single school that doesn't currently have a plot wanted to have one, would you anticipate any significant financial burden on the school system to accommodate that?
I don't believe so. And I hesitate because I don't know the origin of all the ones that are in place right now. Generally speaking, I think those are done with either volunteer time from one of the schools or even PTAs or those types of things. So I don't think there would be any infrastructure costs. And as I mentioned before, we would look for anything that's underground and ask the school to move it if there were something to that effect that would cause additional costs. So I don't really think so.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, Supervisor Briskman, so that you have a motion to...
I do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I move that the joint Board of Supervisors and School Board Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors and School Board that staff be directed to return to the committee with a plan to launch and/or improve gardening programs at LCPS schools, including the following elements: recommendations for a program, an outline for program costs, and an implementation plan, and a plan for assistance in summer maintenance of the gardens.
Second.
Thank you. So I would like staff, and I think what we did on pickleballs is a good model where both staffs kind of worked on it. I was envisioning when I was thinking about this that maybe Parks and Rec could help in the summertime hours when there aren't volunteers available, there aren't teachers available, maybe even PTA support wouldn't be available. And so that was what I was envisioning, but I'm open to some other ideas. If the schools would want to come up with a proposal to have it someone in-house doing it instead of Parks and Recs managing it, I'd be open to that as well, obviously because it's the schools. But I would love to look at opportunities for any other organization as well that might be willing to partner with individual schools to manage and support gardens when students and staff aren't available, such as the summertime hours, as I mentioned. And I would be happy to consider a budget request for this as well, or a budget item for this, depending on how much it costs. Sometimes Parks and Rec can absorb the costs, which I think is what they did with the pickleball. And I think it would be great if they had produce gardens for vegetables and fruits, but also I think that there would be learning opportunities with pollinator gardens or herb gardens or any other style of garden that the Extension Services or anybody would have in mind. So I appreciate committee support on it, and hopefully we can have a program similar to pickleball, just gardens. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Ms. Reeser.
Thank you, co-chairs. So just for my clarification, because I think I followed the motion mostly, but just because this committee operates a little bit differently than most of our committees do procedurally, just to make sure I understand correctly, what would happen is this would go back to each of our respective boards. Therefore, the entire school board would have the opportunity to weigh in on whether they're interested in having staff devote time to exploring the option. Is that correct? Okay.
I think that's pretty much what has to happen because our committee can't direct staff to do stuff. It has to be our respective boards. So hopefully your board will support as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely supportive of having the conversation with our board because there is, I think as you probably saw in the supporting documents for this item, there are a number of schools that I've been involved with that are already doing this. And I think it's a good conversation to have to see if it is a program that has more widespread support. So I think having conversations about ideas is always a good thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, from being at an elementary school that had a butterfly garden and another one that had an actual garden with fruits and vegetables, that the issue was having that staff. And if we can, somehow get folks to help out with that. I don't know if, I believe it was the Virginia Co-op that had discussed that they had different things that they could help with. So that's a possibility that we could have a discussion with them regarding this. So I really do look forward to this, and hopefully we can get this started with schools that would like to participate. And Supervisor Briskman. Oh, I'm sorry, Co-Chair Morse.
Oh, thank you. I too support the discussion. I think that that's always a great way to approach it. And I think Co-Chair Glass, you mentioned the support coming from the schools, which is probably the biggest concern that I have, is that we are placing an additional burden on school staff. There used to be something that hung in the superintendent's office of all the things that were added onto the teachers over the last 100 years. And the list was, there were probably 40 or 50 different things that they are now responsible for. And if we add garden on there, I'm afraid they may be coming with their pitchforks. So I think the discussion is fine. And another concern is if it is within one of the courtyards, and we have people from outside of LCPS involved, now we have security issues and concerns. How are they going to get into the facilities on off hours during summertime and things like that? So there are a lot of different aspects of this that we would probably need to flesh out. But I would fully support sending it back to the school board for discussion.
Thank you.
Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Just by way of closing, I'll just say that one of the reasons I wanted to look into this as something that would be more programmatic than volunteer is because when you rely on volunteers for things like a PTA to fund something or, get a sign-up list going of volunteers, there's certain schools in our county where the families don't have the time or the resources to devote to this sort of thing. So I think what I'm looking for is to make it more programmatic so that we have, sort of equitable distribution of the gardens that are supported by not just volunteers and not just volunteer organizations. So that's sort of what I'm driving at with this. So I really appreciate starting the discussion. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. All in favor, you say aye. Aye. Okay. Aye, I'm sorry, I did not vote. All aye, we all have ayes? Ayes have it? And so, thank you. Yes, that motion will pass, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next item. Item 2, which is student generation factor methodologies and applications. And we have in person Mr. Lewis, and do we have Beverly Tate?
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Glass. Mrs. Tate is with me in the audience there, and Megan Burke from the county is helping us with that, and she helped put us together, and it's also going to be the toggle of the slides as we go through that, and I will share some information, then we'll have time for some questions afterwards. And so before I get too deeply into the slides and the data, you'll see that there's quite a bit of information provided this evening, and this topic has garnered a lot of interest over the past years between both boards, and we've had this presentation or some form of this presentation a number of times, which is indicative of how much interest there is in there, and also the complicated nature of the data. So we appreciate the opportunity to share that. I think it's good to understand that, to put some of that into context as to how these numbers are used, and probably one of the most significant similarities we have between the county number and the school's number is that they're named the same thing, even though they have different uses and different purposes. And when you have different purposes, that warrants a different methodology. And so that's what we're here to talk about, is how that works. From the school's perspective, we have a couple of different things that take into account these student generation factors. And for the most part, the two most significant are the projections, the annual school projections, and our referrals that come to the county, as the LCPS is a referral agency for any application that comes in. So every time an application comes in for a development, we get sent a referral. So that's one of the ways we check that. Mrs. Tate and her team sees the application and comments on that back to the county staff. So those are two things that we do that. But I'll say that the projections are our main function for that. And what we are trying to do is we need to know how many kids are going to be in the 6th grade at Smartsville Middle School every year, so that we have enough teachers and enough classrooms, and we have the capacity in that building to do that. So that's our main function of the projections every year. But they also, then we use that to project out over a 6-year period, which is a short term. So the school's process is a little more short term, where the county's process is a little bit more long term. And to do that, we use what we call the cohort survival method. So the 1st grade is this big in year 1, it becomes a 2nd grade, and we look at see how that number changes, and we create ratios from year to year as that cohort. So, each student is in a cohort of 1st graders at Leesburg Elementary. And so if that group of kids, if there's 100 of them and they grow by 1, then it's a 1% change over from year 1 to year 2. They grow again, it's kind of a 1% again, not exactly. And as that trend, we're trying to establish trend lines, and that's how we do this cohort survival. And so if we get 3 or 4 years at 1 kid per cohort changing, and then the 5th year it jumps to 10, then we have an anomaly. We got to try to figure that out. And if we made a projection saying that next year we think it's going to be 10, and the year after that it's going to be 10, then we're probably going to be overbuilding and over projecting that. So Mrs. Tate's team takes all that math and goes through that statistical analysis and tries to figure out where those blips are and make sure that we have an accurate trend analysis to know what to anticipate that fifth year class is going to be when it goes to sixth grade the following year. And keep in mind, there are other feeder schools coming into that sixth grade, so there's a lot of things feeding into that. So for the context, that is what we're doing for projections. And I think the key for this conversation is, as we've done that, we've figured out how big that class is. I have yet to mention student generation factor. And the reason for that is it's a very minute, very, very minor part of that projection process. So after those statistical analysis is done, then we look at, okay, what else is happening in the neighborhood? There's an application on the way, and there's going to be X number of homes in there. So then that's where the math of the statistical analysis turns a little bit to art, and Mrs. Tate and her team looks at it and says, okay, how is that going to be affected by that? So all of that to say that the student generation factor is a very minor part of the projection process. It is, though, a little more influential on the referral process. So we get an application and it says a developer wants to build 100 homes. That's going to produce X number of students. So we apply that number to that. But what's really important is we're only projecting for the number of LCPS students. And we have slides that talk about that and why it differs from there. So I wanted to put that little context together of how the projections are done well before we even start thinking about the student generation factor, so that we can, these numbers that we're about to look at may make a little bit more sense. So hopefully we'll do that, and hopefully I haven't confused it, but I know this is a complicated topic and it will continue to be. So if we go to the next slide, we'll start in, so dig it into some of the specific information. And what you see here is we tried to differentiate school system on the left, county on the right, and this is our student generation factor, what we use them for. So as I just mentioned a minute ago, on the left-hand column there, it's a component in our forecasting, but not the biggest thing. So it's that added on to our cohort survival method. For Loudon County, it is the input for calculating the capital intensity factor. So it becomes more of a way to manage the offsetting of an impact for development, rather than specifically saying how many kids are going to be in what school. We also use that to assess our future potential as well as operating and capital impact. So we do use that to project how many schools we're going to be needing. And the county uses that for calculating the capital cost. So even though schools are part of the capital cost, obviously because they're part of both CIPs, we are still calculating those differently. And you'll see there is, we use that for our timing and school facilities, but the county doesn't directly use that. And to the point I made earlier, we're focusing, we needed to know how many classroom seats we have in that next 6-year window. The most important year is next year, whereas, you know, a development that comes in and builds 100 homes may take several years to build out. But we really need, our key is we've got to know how many kids we're going to have next year. And so the first year is going to always be our most accurate, because that's the one we have the most information for. So as we go on to, oh, and I will say that we focus on every house. When we figure out a student generation factor, we take all houses in Loudon County and all LCPS students, whereas the county's number focuses on new residential units, because you're really talking about impact on things that are going to happen in the future and the most relevant things for the last 10 years. So the next slide, we talk about more in depth on the data. So I think it's important to recognize that both the county staff and the school staff uses the same data. We have our enrollment data, the LMIS system that has all the property information, the tax assessments, building permits, and GIS data. So those are all information points that we share, so we're getting our information from the exact same place. And moving to the next slide, we'll talk about what the differences are in these processes. And this is really where that first row on this is really where the rubber meets the road and why these two items are different. We are counting LCPS enrolled students and only LCPS students, and we don't count houses that are in age restricted. So we do from time to time get a student or two out of those areas, but generally speaking, we don't count all those homes. And we don't count private school or homeschooled students because we're not serving them. We don't have to build a seat for them. whereas the county services do have to provide services to everyone. And so the county's student generation factor includes all those students that are school age. So that's probably the most significant. If you walked away from anything, that line right there is probably the most significant point as to why these two numbers have been different and will continue to be different. We do have some slightly different ways to look at the homes. We have single-family, detached, and attached, and multifamily. The county breaks those up into rural and suburban for the single-family detached, and also has a multifamily stacked calculation that they're focusing on too. And you'll see a little bit later that we're working on that as well. Slight difference, we talk about constructed and permitted, so anything that has a permit we're going to count because there's going to be a child in that house soon, and the county only counts the ones that have already been completely constructed. So we're a little bit ahead of that because that's something that we really need to know for that 6-year window, maybe not necessarily the year 1, but year 6 it will come into account. We do this every single year, so we adjust these every year so that, as I mentioned, it's number of houses divided by number of students, so it's an actual number. And the county does theirs every other year, which is not a significant difference, but it is just a little bit. We have a later slide that talks about our geographic reference, where these factors apply. Currently what we have is we have 6 different student generation factors for each of the 6 different planning districts that we have. And right now the county is doing that countywide, but with 2 divisions for rural and non-rural. So that does create a slightly different thing, and I think it might even be the next slide or next couple of slides, we have some numbers for that. This is it here. So the top table is what the Loudon County Public Schools student generation factor, the one below that's for the county. And there's a lot of numbers there, so if you look at the single-family detached, the first line on the schools budget line, if you go all the way to the right, you'll see Western Loudon has 0.47 students generated in a single-family detached. If you go about the middle of that table, you'll see that the Dulles North area, we're seeing 1.01 students coming out of that. So there is a difference between 0.47 and 1.01 across the county. Similarly, if you look down at the county table, you'll see in single-family detached, suburban versus rural, they also have a difference between 1.13 and 0.84. So they are in the same general neighborhood, but they are different. And we have found over time that as certain areas develop, it's really important that we zero in on that. In the past, we had like a county-wide one, and what we see in the Dulles area is a whole lot different than maybe what we see in Western Loudon. So that's helping us be more accurate as we move forward. So moving on to the next slide, we'll see that and this is just a summary of how we have evolved that over time. I think it's just important to recognize that we are constantly watching that and constantly trying to adjust to be more accurate. Prior to 2012, we used the census. Since 2012, we're using this actual student enrollment. And the official date is September 30th, so every year we take that enrollment on that date, and that number is used throughout the year for the enrollment for that year. And you'll see there in 2012 to 18, we had a county-wide student generation factor that was only differentiated between public utilities and non-public utilities. And now we've gone and changed that to we're having a separate one for each of those individual planning districts to hopefully zero in on where we have more rapid growth. And when we're doing referrals, which this is more relevant to, we have a number that's related just to that particular area. So that's hopefully, as we go on, we'll continue to refine those and make sure that we have the best information we can. So then we provided some things. Supervisor Glass, you asked for a couple of examples. And so we look back. It's hard to find something back 10 years, but it is a good exercise to see. In this particular case, situation, Evermont Trace, this application was submitted in 2012. And you'll see there in the table at the bottom that it had 35 single-family detached and 55 single-family attached. In 2013, we did the referral to the county staff and alerted the staff that we would be expecting 56 students to come from that application. That's based on our 2012 student growth factor. When you look to today, 10 years later, you see that the actual enrollment is much more than that. It's 90. And so things have changed over that time, and so we've had that slide before. We've had several adjustments to our student growth factor to try to make sure we're hitting those things and adjusting to that. Conversely, on the next slide, you'll see the exact opposite happen. You see, this is an application for One Loudon, and it was submitted in February of 2005 and approved in 2007. Very significant to this application is right below that, you'll see that after that, there were 3 revisions to that application. So our referral went in 2007, and after that, or actually 2005, and after that, 3 changes were made. You can see in the first column on the table that the original 2005 application had 265, 329, and 446 units. To that, we believe that 499 students would come from that application. Since that time, and subsequent to those application revisions, the number of units went up significantly to 265, 397, and 605. But when you look at today's enrollment, it's even much lower. So we have more units built, and these are actually built, and fewer kids coming out. So we're constantly looking at why is that, and you know, sometimes that's because it's being marketed to a different group of folks, and they have fewer kids, and so those are trends that we're looking at and trying to find. But it's just an example. One example was we got more kids than we thought, and this example is we had less. But in both cases, there's a significant number of years that have transpired over that time that has affected that. So that is something, the lag of what actually happens 10 years later will always be different. You know how they say the definition of an estimate, the definition is going to be wrong. I mean, it's going to be not accurate, and so we're going to do as best we can to try to predict that. But these are a couple examples of where that is, and then I can just say that from staff to staff, we're trying every way we can to look at those trends and try to project that. And then I think we have, yes, one more slide about the multifamily type. I mentioned earlier that the county differentiates that between the stacked and the regular. And so we are looking at that. We do believe at this point we don't have enough information to create another category for that, but we'll continue to watch that. And one of the things that we're also looking at is maybe we should rethink our process and look at number of bedrooms rather than just the type of unit itself. And so those are things we'll be vetting over the next few years to try to figure that out. And you know, that may be data that's not readily available for everything that's there as well. So that's something we're looking for. And I think that rounds out the slides. Nope, sorry. You did ask, Ms. Glass, you asked for our projection accuracy. And so you'll see here, it's important to note that this is 2012 to 2021. And from 2012 to 2019, as always, and for many years before that, the projection rate for the overall county and has been well within 1% error for all those years. 2020 and 2021, you'll see there that has changed significantly, and that is something that we have all been dealing with. As you know, we know that a lot of students move from public education across the country, not just here. We do believe they're going to come back. We don't know what percentage will come back and when they'll come back. And we're all sitting on bated breath waiting for this September 30 to see how many people register for this fall, because it could be a significant number of those folks come back this year. So that is I think we've answered the questions that were posed to us, but we're happy to take any other questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Briskman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that. That actually really helps. And one of my questions was, do you now do referrals based on the area? And you answered that question that, in fact, yes, you do. I was wondering, we've had a couple discussions of late on the board related to one application that brought up a couple questions for me, at least. And my question is, when you open a school or you're scheduling to open a school, do you assume that school is going to be full the day it opens, or what's your assumptions on that?
So we certainly hope it's not full the day it opens, but
I do too, but I want to make sure.
That has happened a couple of times,
Oh, wow.
and this is a conversation, and maybe Mr. Morris will want to chime in as well over the past years, and Mrs. Reeser as well. Is what we do is we look at the compilation of the schools in a particular area and look for when a school or a number of schools are going to get to the point where they are full, so that we can time through our CIP and plan for within that 6-year window when the next school needs to be open. And so if we have 6 schools in a certain planning area and we're seeing that some of those are getting overtaxed and going to be over capacity, then we'll plan for opening a new school. So that takes a number of years.
Yeah.
Those schools will continue to change with their enrollment. But then the key deciding factor of that is what the actual boundaries are. So once the school gets to the point where it's starting to be under construction, then boundaries are changed. And so that adjusts that, and that may
Okay.
help us, that will have an influence on how full that school opens. It
Okay.
may open with half as many students that it holds, or it may open close to being filled. And sometimes that is a function of all the schools there, the geographic area, and the growth in
Okay,
the whole
okay. And then do you, if a school has trailers outside, when you're doing a referral, do you count that as usable space and seats?
I believe so. I'm going to look for a nod from Mrs. Tate. Yes.
Okay, okay. And then how do you account, I have 2 other questions. How do you account for by right development? And then how do you know, you mentioned the private schools, how do you know that someone's sending their, or will send their kids to private school, and or when they might be sending their kids back to public school? I think a lot of parents send their kids back for high school. So how do you work that out?
So there's a process that's managed through our Department of Student Services that addresses when students are unenrolled or go to a private school or homeschool. And so we have some indication of that. And then when they come back, we're not really sure. We know when they start to enroll. So right now, enrollment's open, and we see kids will be enrolling all summer long. And so that will be our indication of when they're coming back. But we really won't know until that happens in September, and we take that official number for the year. But then do remember that we have kids enroll in school all year round at every school. So those numbers change all the time. And I seem like I left something out of your question. By right. So yes, that is a little bit more difficult in timing because we don't have that application process as far in advance, but we do typically get that information through the process with the county. So we do know when they're coming, and generally speaking, do our best to try to keep track of that, but it's not as easy as the one. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Umstad?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First, Mr. Lewis, this is an excellent presentation, and it clarifies a lot, and you all did a really good job with it. Thank you. It's very helpful. So I'd like to follow up on an answer you gave to Supervisor Briskman when we were talking about modular classrooms or trailers. When we get a referral from the county in one of our residential rezoning applications, one thing the schools provide is base building capacity. So are trailers an addition to base building capacity? Is base building capacity only the brick and mortar school building? How do you define that?
So in our CIP, we have every school is delineated with what their base building capacity is. And so in that table, you'll see you have the name of the school, and then you have the base building capacity. And anytime there is a modular unit on that campus, you'll see an asterisk for that, and it'll tell you that it's there and how many students it accounts for. So it is in that base building number, but it's also delineated if you wanted to take it out. I mean, our goal is to not have modular classrooms. And then so we've had many projects over the years where we build additions to support that when we know it's going to be an ongoing thing. And then sometimes when it's a temporary measure, then we'll take them out. But we always footnote it so you're aware, you can see what that information is.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Co-Chair Moore?
Go ahead.
Ms. Reeser?
I just have a quick follow-up actually for Supervisor Umstattd. Is there somewhere else or any of the supervisors where it would be helpful for you to have the additional information as you're considering things about what is modular and what is brick and mortar?
Madam Co-Chair, may I respond?
Sure.
Actually, I think it probably works pretty well the way it's presented because the information's all in the staff report that we get, and oftentimes that's the one thing we have time to look at. So I appreciate that question, but I think you're doing a good job with it as it is.
Well, I appreciate that. I can't take any of the credit, but as you rightly already gave it to the staff. Thank you.
Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So just a couple thoughts from having worked with Mr. Lewis and Ms. Tate now for 10 years and trying always to get the best numbers. Every year the adjustments come, and you know it is very challenging, and they do a superb job of trying to nail those numbers down. Now, the overall numbers are generally, they've been very accurate over the last 10 years. You saw, with the exception of 2020 and 2021, that they were within 1%. And that's in a macro sense over the entire division. However, the challenges that we have are within specific locations in high growth areas. If you're talking about the middle of Ashburn, you're talking about a set number of houses with a set number of kids already there and a turnover rate of X. So the variables are somewhat limited. When you're talking about a space down south of Braddock Road near North Star, where the number of houses isn't quite settled, the size of the houses isn't quite settled, the population, you don't know what type of population may be moving into that area. As we saw in the one Loudon, where they moved in without any kids. What we're finding in a lot of other places is in a 3,000 square foot townhouse, there can be two families living there. So now we're challenged by the size, and that's something the staff was talking about accommodating. We're challenged by the location, and the numbers, when you look at a specific school, they can vary greatly. We are suffering through that right now with Hovatter, where the number of children that came after a 2-year, all bets are off kind of scenario, where 2020 and 2021, we did not have a great idea of exactly how many kids were going to be coming to school. We are seeing the repercussions of that in being 3 years out now and seeing the first stable numbers, what we believe are going to be stable, and they're way above everything we projected. So it's quite challenging. I think it's fair to say that LCPS calculations must be much more accurate, I think, than overall county numbers, because no kidding, if you can't put 25 kids in one classroom, the ripples are from there on out. So changing the boundaries, we talk a lot about how we could balance the schools, but changing boundaries, as you probably realize, is very disruptive. It's so disruptive to the families and the students, the teachers. We don't traditionally do that on a larger scale unless we're opening a new school. So, of course, we're always opening a new school, so that region has to go through that every year when a new school is open. I think that some of the discussion into the future, when we talk about Parkview and some of the schools up north where there's availability, the future may change, and we may be doing more adjustments of school boundaries without new construction, because there are seats available, and there are other schools where they're way overcrowded. So we're going to have to start looking at that as an option, which is unusual in our past. We haven't done that frequently. Also, two other things, the wave that we talk about, the growth that comes through, the reason why we never build to the maximum is because the maximum won't occur. Typically, when I look at the Dulles South area, I saw the growth occur in South Riding. I saw it start to grow as you got further west into Stone Ridge, and it creates a bow wave of children. And 15 to 20 years after that community is built, a lot of the young families that were there now have older children, and they are out of the school system, and the houses start to turn over, but they're turning over at a much slower rate. So what happens is the capacity is still there, but the enrollment will drop. If the community starts to age, if it's more than 15 years old, the population of students will go down. So what we try to do is we try to build it to, say, the 110%, so that at the peak, when it's at the 15-year point and all the schools are packed, we're at 110%, because we know on the back end of that, it's going to come back down to 80 to 90%. And there's going to be space available for teachers' lounges and, specialized classrooms and things like that. But there's a period of time frequently where there is no space, there is no excess space. They're taking up every square inch of the school is now for instruction. So they're challenged to do that.
And Mr. Morse, I hate to cut you off there. but
Are you guys
time-
using timers? Wow.
Yes.
All right. Well, I will relinquish the 0 that I left on the clock. Thank you.
Hold on. I'll just want to see if anyone else has another round of any questions. Okay, Mr. Morse. Go ahead, go.
All right. So I get 3 on the second go-round. Okay. I'll keep an eye on that. You know, it's funny because normally we're on this side of the timer and you don't see it, but I understand. The last item was the modulars, and modulars cannot be used in the short term. It takes a long time to get the area prepped, to get the services provided, the electrical power, the generation, all of those factors that need to go into placing a modular. It's just like building a building. It really is. Staff takes that kind of care in making sure that the site is prepared properly to put the modulars up. And it's a midterm solution. We don't want it there long-term. Long-term, we want the students to be in a brick-and-mortar school. We have security concerns with modulars, but you can't expect the school division to turn around and place a modular 1 year out. It just doesn't work that way. So I appreciate it when staff, their modulars are not very popular from staff or from the public's perspective, so we use those sparingly. Okay. And I yield my minute and 55.
Thank you. I just have one question. Could you please explain, please expand on slide number 10 in the presentation about why LCPS does not wish to differentiate between different types of multifamily units? And then we have the stacked 2-over-2s, which is something that we're starting to build all over the place.
Yes, so essentially, I guess the shortest, easiest answer is we don't have enough data to differentiate a new student growth factor for that. So as we continue to look at that, those are not brand new, but they are relatively new, and we are trying to collect as much information as we can. And at this point, we just don't have enough information to definitively go out and say that we need to differentiate between that for this process. So we're working at that, and as said, ultimately we may come back in consultation with county staff as well, or start looking at number of bedrooms rather than just simply that different type of unit.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to I really appreciate staff, and thank you so much for the 2 reports that you have provided on this topic. I regularly receive questions from constituents regarding how student generation rates are determined when we analyze rezoning requests. With the 2 items in the answer I received, I feel the projections are very accurate in serving as well from a planning perspective. And I will share this information when I have constituents to reach out moving forward. And thank you all again. Next, we'll have additions and deletions. Last month, Co-Chair Morse had requested to add a sidewalk, to add a crosswalk item. And it wasn't voted on, but, and it wasn't added to the plan. So I wanted to make a motion. I move that the Joint Board of Supervisors and School Board Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors and the School Board that an additional item discussing missing pedestrian facilities, such as missing sidewalk, trail links, and crosswalks in school walk zones or touching school properties, be added to the committee's 2022 work plan, including possible grant funding opportunities to construct such pedestrian facilities.
Second.
Thank you. I made this motion to have a look into pedestrian facilities. such as crosswalks and missing links around the schools in the county. This is in conjunction with an expansion with Co-Chair Morse's request to look into crosswalks from the last meeting. I wanted to make sure that we add missing pedestrian links, because I know there are several missing links around schools that should be connected to provide safe passage. I also hope to use this review as an opportunity to explore funding options through different grant programs, such as the Federal Safe Routes to Schools program. I saw Ms. Briskman's.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit curious about what we want to accomplish here. The county did an exhaustive missing links study, which has identified like every single missing link in the county. So I feel like we have that data. Is it just a matter that we want it presented to the joint committee, that data?
If we have that data, then I definitely would like to bring it forward and have
Okay,
that discussion.
And
But,
then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I also, want us to see that if we can make sure that if we can get funding for those
Yeah.
missing links, that we have that also.
I think that our staff at least looks for grant opportunities already, but I would be interested in the safe routes to schools. The only other thing I'm curious about is with the crosswalks. Is the school board considering changing its policy on crosswalks or school zones or anything like that? Because that might be interesting to certain people in my community who feel like they don't have safe routes to school. So is this sort of looking at changing any of those policies?
I think that could be something of a discussion.
May I ask Mr. Morse what his
Mr.
intent is?
I think that, and Ms. Glass and I were talking about exactly what we were trying to focus on. I think that because of the overlapping responsibilities, areas of responsibility, and the difficulty in that collaboration, I know that we have discussed changes in policy under Finance and Operations Committee. Our challenge is that we don't have the whole puzzle. We only have one piece of it. And so the whole intention on bringing this was, as you know, there were many residents in your district that felt that there was a need to have that collaborative approach to provide a safer route to school for the students.
Yeah.
And so when I went out and I walked the routes and talked to some folks and a lot of feedback from the public, I just felt that there was a broad disconnect between the responsibilities and how we could work together to provide those safe routes so that the community felt safe and that it was an economical solution for the division and for the county.
Okay.
So,
okay. No, that's fine by me. It does get really complicated between VDOT and the sheriff's department and then the schools and all that. So thank you.
Mr. Morse?
yeah, so thank you for the segue, because what I'd like to do is propose an alternate, a substitute motion. And the motion is, I move to discuss safe pedestrian passage to school and identify potential solutions to issues and concerns voiced by the community. Further, that LCPS, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, joined by the Leesburg Police and the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office and VDOT, collaborate in discussion on these solutions.
Madam Co-Chair, question for Co-Chair Morse.
Yes.
Percival has its own police force and schools in the town. Do you want to include Percival?
Yes, I would include all stakeholders that have a vested interest in, if they have solutions that they need within their community, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that'd be appropriate.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you.
So I would modify the substitute motion to include the Percival Police.
First, I'd like to second the motion so we can continue discussing
Thank
it.
you.
And you're welcome. And I would just like to to know if it would be possible to have the two motions in writing, because it would be easier for me to, if anyone has it, or if, thank you.
I apologize, Ms. Reeser.
It's fine, thank you. Oh, actually, I apologize, it's just under my other piece of paper. Thank you. I didn't realize that Mr. Morse's was here as well, so.
Oh, it is?
Is it?
No?
No, so I think,
No.
I think I just
This
need
was
yours.
created after, I read Co-Chair Glass's.
Yes.
And I thought that the approach really only answered half of what I thought was the problem, because there are, as I said, there are overarching challenges with responsibility and funding issues, concerns like that, that span all of these organizations, and I do think it's important. I can share with you my written copy if that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you.
So, Chair Glass,
Yes.
if it's the committee's pleasure, we can make copies of that and distribute it to the committee.
Yes, please. Ms. Briskman.
Is School Board Member Reeser, are you finished? Okay, yeah. I'm not going to support the alternate motion. I think that we should discuss it in committee with our staffs first, and then decide if we want to bring in subsequently the law enforcement on it, because I'm actually more interested in VDOT and the school zones issue than I am with LCSO or the police departments having input here, because I view them. I mean, I know they do the crossing guards, but they only do the crossing guards if it's requested from the schools. And they have been very willing to go and enforce when we've had issues or complaints, and they're very willing to work with us. I think that the first motion is the better one for now, and then if we want to continue our discussion with the law enforcement community, that we should do that at a later point. Thank you.
Mr. Morse?
Yes, so I'm challenged because as I look at this, what was provided was something that I believe has almost been fully vetted out in many different areas. So I was concerned that the approach that was provided in the original motion does not provide us a clear path forward of collaboration, which I view, after discussions, in hours of discussions with both your constituency and the staff. We've been through this in many different areas, but the real challenge is the collaboration. When the sheriff's office does provide crossing guards, but will not provide them in certain areas, but will in other areas, and they have preferences into how wide the median needs to be. So there are very specific things that we could address that might solve the problem. And if we're not, if the motion is only looking to connect trails and things like that as it was worded, then it will not solve the problem. So I would still support the substitute motion and hope that committee members would see that. Thank you.
Ms. Umstad?
Thank you, ma'am. I don't suppose that perhaps Co-Chair Morse's concerns could be addressed through a friendly amendment to Co-Chair Glass's original motion. I think there's merit in both of those. I don't want to throw out the very good ideas I think that Co-Chair Glass has, but I think Co-Chair Morse brings additional concerns that are valid, and I would actually like to see these two motions combined. That would be my preference.
Ms. Reeser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was simply going to add that I think regardless of which route we take, I would hope that even with the original motion, if it passed as it stood and there was no friendly amendment, nothing would prevent us from inviting other stakeholders to participate. So regardless of what happens, I think if we have that need, we should include other agencies to give us their input.
Mr. Morse?
Yes, I think what Ms. Umstadt recommended would be fine. I would withdraw the substitute motion in place of an amendment and just have the language amended to your motion so that we could cover both. I do worry that without the language here, that those other stakeholders would be focused on finding, missing pedestrian walkways, trail links, and crosswalks, and focus on that versus what I think is the larger problem, and that is we do have crossings, and they are considered unsafe. So it's not necessarily that anything's missing. That's why I'd be willing to withdraw the substitute motion and make it an amendment to your main motion, if that's the will of the committee.
I think I would agree with that to blend it together, because I think the discussion of safe passages is something that's important to especially our walking communities, and those who would rather drive their kids to school because they feel that it's unsafe for their kids to walk there. Ms. Briskman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just thinking about how to create the merging. So maybe we say something like that an additional item discussing missing pedestrian facilities such as missing sidewalk, trail links, and crosswalks in school walk zones or touching school properties. And I think maybe if we add something about crossing guards, and that might sort of pull in the law enforcement on that aspect of it.
Yes, Ms. Reeser.
So we could consider just taking the first sentence in Mr. Morse's previously substitute motion, or previously suggested substitute motion, and just because they both begin with discuss, they could read after the Board of Supervisors and the school board take that an additional item discussing include the first sentence from Mr. Morse's motion, and then leave the rest of it.
Okay,
Just joined together by the word and.
I would agree.
Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Yes, if you could,
Okay.
please.
So I move a substitute motion. I move that the Joint Board of Supervisors and School Board Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors and the school board that an additional item discussing safe pedestrian passage to school and identifying potential solutions to issues and engineering voiced by the community, and missing pedestrian facilities such as missing sidewalk, trail links, and crosswalks in school walk zones or touching school properties be added to the committee's 2022 work plan, including possible grant funding opportunities to construct such pedestrian facilities.
Second.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and was second.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
sorry.
We have to pull.
I think you might have to withdraw
Withdraw.
your first motion,
Okay.
or just I think you have to withdraw, or it's an alternate, I guess. So
I did move to substitute. I
Great,
did,
perfect.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Just,
Mr. Morse?
are we going to discuss it, or are we moving straight to a vote?
We can have a discussion on it.
So I was just going to change the word engineering to concerns. I think that might be a handwriting problem. So it was issues and concerns as opposed to issues in engineering.
I agree that there's a handwriting problem.
Okay. Thank you. I should have been a doctor, but thank you.
Okay.
someone might want to type that up and just send it to staff. Just type up the motion.
I'm a good typer. I'll take care of that.
Yes. All right. All those in favor, can you say aye, please? Aye. Aye. Those opposed? Ayes have it. And I appreciate you all supporting this motion. I think this is extremely important. And if we don't have any other additions or deletions, I just like to thank staff for all of your hard work and appreciate all that you do for us. And I will, do any committee members have any comments or anything? All right, so let's go ahead and adjourn for the day.